reminder, we're doing roll call votes for the case. I know that's new, but.
I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, March 9th Planning Board meeting. If we please stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, we'd like to open the open forum. If we could just limit 5 minutes for any presentation, not on the agenda. I do see no citizens are present, so I open and close the open forum. Okay. Should we go ahead and do the swearing in process?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you swear the testimony you are about to give is the truth, so help you before God?
I do.
Thank you.
And our first agenda item is the approval of the minutes from October 27th.
Move to approve.
I hear a move and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, we have the next agenda item as the code amendment to the definitions of the secondary fronts for corner lot properties and including provisions to the 6-foot fencing with definition of secondary fronts of corner lots, and we'll turn it up to Tati. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Tatiana Childress, City of Oldsmar Planning and Redevelopment Director. So today we have one case code amendment providing secondary front definitions and corner lot fencing provisions. The background for this code amendment, residential corner lots are considered to have 2 fronts for the setback determination purposes. Excuse me. The code additionally states that all residential fences must be no taller than 3.5 feet if extending the facade of the house. To install a fence of up to 6 feet along additional corner lot front yard, meaning the secondary front yard, a variance process has been in place which requires an action by the Board of Adjustment followed by the fence permit application. Now, in 2015, the process for a 6-foot fence approval along the additional front or secondary front for residential corner lot was simplified to an administrative variance, requiring only the technical review committee, followed by the fence permit application. This graphic represents where the secondary front and the primary front of the house for a corner lot. Oh, my PowerPoint is not up. There we go. So the front yard is usually the front where you have your address, where the property is addressed from, and where you have your main driveway. And the secondary front is along the additional front if you live on a corner lot. So although this process was simplified from the regular variance to administrative variance, the requirements continue to cause hardship to the residents, delaying the permitting process and causing additional expenses associated with the requirements of the certificate of ownership and also the administrative variance fee, which is $250 today. In 2018, a code amendment for the Town Center Code was approved, defining secondary fronts and allowing 6-foot fence in the secondary fronts without an administrative variance, supplemented only with a fence permit, but the current provisions for secondary fronts are only applicable within the Town Center CRA area. So if you're outside of the town center, you're still required to have the administrative variance to pay $250, and also get the certificate of ownership. It causes delays, so this amendment will eliminate the need for administrative variance review and would only require standard permit review application. The reviewers today, they already check the fence placement against applicable sections of the code, and that includes the clear site visibility triangles, setback requirements, and easements. Additionally, the code amendment will include a provision that 6-foot fences along defined secondary fronts must be offset from the sidewalk by 5 feet. Most of the times you have a utility easement that is adjacent to your sidewalk, and sidewalk in most cases is already 5 feet from the property line. But in older platted areas of Oldsmar, you have a condition where you have a sidewalk and then you have your property line right on that sidewalk. So we have to offset that 5 feet to be consistent in the city. And some of these discussed items are shown on this graphic. So the clear visibility triangle is as you're in the corner and you're trying to look in that intersection, that would be 15 feet from the intersection of that street. So that's your kind of like to your right. And then the 5-foot setback from the back of the sidewalk is demonstrated here. If you can see it by the tree. This is just another visual. It helps you to see for the clear site triangle. So we do not allow fences on a corner, so extending beyond the facade of the house or beyond the limits of the clear site triangle if there is an issue. And this is just in the planimetric view, so that's how it looks on the plan. When somebody submits it to us, we check where, and this one particular had a utility easement. So in the utility easement, at a plan review, we're allowed to put gates. So if there's an access to that utility easement, so the utility company can go in and do their work without interfering with the homeowner. So the request for the text amendment was reviewed against the standards of approval outlined in section 3.13.2 of the Land Development Code. The amendment complies with the comprehensive plan and advances the purpose of the Land Development Code. The comprehensive plan requires orderly and concise development, and the proposed amendment will apply the permit-only method for secondary front corner lot fences applications to the entire city and not only the town center. So this process has been already in place since 2018, the process of a permit only it's applicable to the town center code, because in 2018, the code change introduced the secondary fronts within the architectural standards of the town center, providing the secondary front and the 6-foot fence. So that's the only difference why they today are allowed to have a 6-foot fence only in the town center. This amendment will contribute to promote the community's welfare. As I mentioned, the administrative variance process creates a hardship for residents, delaying the permit approval process. No conflicts have occurred using the permit-only process in the town center since 2019, and none of the administrative variances have been denied based on the required height along the secondary front in the past. So this unanimous approval of the administrative variances by technical review committee also demonstrate no need for additional review beyond the permit. So we reviewed once at the permit level really thoroughly by the same members of the technical review committee, and for the town center, it's did not cause any trouble since 2018. So it's been in place for town center. The amendment will not grant a special privilege to an individual property owner. The proposed amendment will remove the administrative variance requirement for corner lot 6-foot fence request for all residential properties, as I mentioned. And by defining the secondary front, all homeowners in the city are eligible for a permitted 6-foot fence along that defined secondary front. subject to review and approval by the planning official and technical review services. It is only applied to corner lots, so it is not applicable to any other property. So if you want a 6-foot fence anywhere else in the front yard, they haven't been supported by the Board of Adjustments, and and they're not qualified for administrative review or any kind of other. I mean, you can still bring it as a variance, but from my prior knowledge, they haven't been supported by. And based on the discussion, staff recommends approval of the text amendment to the to provide definitions for secondary fronts for corner lot properties and to include provisions for 6-foot fences within defined secondary fronts for corner lots. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. There any questions for the staff? Start down the end?
Nope.
Bob?
No questions. My daughter ran into a situation like this, and because of the setback, she had to lose 14 feet of her backyard property, which was just uncalled for, ridiculous. So, you know, as a matter of fact, I mean, I wouldn't even, if it were me, I wouldn't even want the 5-foot setback from the back of the, I think you ought to be able to put it right up against the edge of the sidewalk myself. I don't, 5-foot setback, I mean, well, just as curiosity, I mean, I'm in favor of this. Just out of curiosity, why the 5-foot setback?
So as I mentioned, most of our plats, they already include the 5-foot setback in the newer subdivisions, but some of the older originally platted ones, they have their property right along the sidewalk. Right. So it's the design standards maybe changed over time. Some of the older sidewalks were placed there, I don't know, 30 years ago. So, and then we had complaints, well, people walk, say, their dogs, or they have plants. It's very difficult to maintain that area between the sidewalk and the fence. So for two purposes, just for consistency within the city, so that is 5 foot anywhere in the city from the sidewalk, and then for maintenance. So if you reduce it to something less, you would still have to maintain it. So 5 foot.
It just kind of, that's okay.
That was recommended by the city attorney, so I could bring it back to for the discussion if needed, to discuss in greater details.
Like I said, it's just it's a personal thing because I know what happened to my daughter. But 14 feet and 5 feet is a big difference from what she lost to what you're talking about here. I guess, my only concern is, even though it's 5 foot, that means you've got to go outside the fence and maintain 5 foot of property that you really don't get to use anymore. Since you put the fence up, you lost that 5 feet of property from there to the sidewalk. And in the size of the lots in the state of Florida, that's a lot.
Well, we only have, I can review some of the older plats, and we only may have like a few properties that still have that option.
I would only want to do that if the rest of the board was, I don't want anything like that to happen just because of me, but anyway.
Sure, but we could investigate this further for sure. Most of the properties, as I mentioned, they already have a maintained 5 foot setback from the sidewalk, so.
Good, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. I actually kind of personally have an issue, not an issue with this, but had an issue because I bought my house in 16. I'm on a corner lot, and I spent months trying to work with Marie, trying to understand this variance process. And then she called me and said, hey, no more variance, let's just get it done, trying to push my fence out. I will tell you that my property line is actually already 5 feet off of the sidewalk. So there's already that setback where I'm at. So we just went out to the property line. So I thought that this was citywide that went. I didn't know it was just CRA where I live. So I'm definitely for this. This is great for the citizens.
Thank you.
Geez, Bob, for not having a question, you sure rattled for a while.
They have names for people like you.
I actually have a corner lot, and I've run into this before, and I have some questions about it. So when I first did it, the code enforcement guy was telling me that you can't go out. If you wanted to have a fence in my side yard, really, I'd have to be 15 feet off of the sidewalk. And then the neighbor behind me is right up to the 5 foot line. So there'd be a 10 foot difference between where the fences ended. So that's taking that away. Now I can go out to the 5 foot from the sidewalk?
So we would still check for the clear side triangle, the 15-foot. I'm thinking that has
Oh, yeah, I
something
don't
to
have
do
that
with it.
problem. That wouldn't be an issue where I want to put the fence.
So we can review it if you submit your application with the survey to the building division. We'll review it and we can let you know. Yeah.
And the second question I have
As long as
is-
you don't have any easement, sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Second question I have is, if somebody who has built their fence up to the sidewalk, like Bob was saying, and they tear that fence down to replace it, do they have to take it 5 feet back now, or?
Yes, so today it will be considered an existing nonconformity. We're not gonna go with the code enforcement after them, tell them move it. But if, say, for instance, they wanted to replace the fence, or the hurricane comes through and the fence is down, so they have to resubmit for the fence permit, they will have to follow the new code. Yes, 5 foot, consistent for everybody.
That's, my neighbor behind me had their fence taken out by a hurricane, by the way. And they just built it right back up to the 5 foot line, and that was before we were even talking about this. So it should have been brought back to 15 foot then, right?
The 15-foot was never in place, so I'm not sure where the 15-foot is coming from, unless, if I have a visual, I would have a better understanding. But again, I would suggest to bring the plan to the planning division, and we can review it in detail.
Well, I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't put, I'm not gonna put a fence up. I have never really wanted to put a fence up. In fact, I think fences build barriers between people and between neighbors, and that's why you don't walk out of your house and say, hey, Joe, how's it going? Because you don't see anything, and then because they have a fence there.
I see.
You know, so I'm against that kind of stuff in the first place, but then I grew up in a city where there was no
Sometimes
fences.
where the confusion comes from, you have an extra wide, maybe right away, so you may have 15 feet up to the sidewalk, and some people think that this is their property, but if you check your survey, your property line might be 15 feet away from that sidewalk. So maybe that's the situation. That's why they told you in the past that it has to be 15 feet from the sidewalk. Because your property line may not extend all the way to that sidewalk.
Well, you said I could have a 3.5 foot fence right up against the sidewalk.
On your property, so only on your property. If that extends beyond your property, you're not allowed to put it in the city right away. Yeah.
And you're talking about not my property is the right of way.
Correct.
So if the right of way covers a swale, I don't have to cut the grass there no more, right?
Unfortunately, there's another section of the code that states that you have to maintain your property in front of you. So if you have an extra wide right of way, again, that's kind of like your property for maintenance, but not your on paper as it states on the survey.
Okay.
So.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be such a.
Oh, no, this is actually better than Planning 101. I was thinking if we bring one of these cases each month, next month we're trying to do the ISR, the impervious surface area ratio, because that came up recently, and maybe we'll have a discussion like this so that we actually discuss in greater details and with pictures, so it helps you to understand how those zoning items are applied into the planning and zoning enforcement, and kind of like that's what we do. Instead of just kind of like going through the list and reading it, it's a live project, so to say, so.
I do have one more question. That 15-foot area where you could, so for visibility, how do you determine where the angle is? Is it a 90-degree angle from the corner?
So that's a tricky question. That's where the engineer comes in with his scale, and that's usually the technical review committee. They determine in the engineering department where they have to count it from, because there is this working? No, the mouse is not working. So you have like where your curve starts. So basically that's where you will probably initiate. So not from the actual, or we had a discussion. So if you, again, wanted to have more details about how it's determined, you can reach out to Daniel Simpson. Yes, he can provide you more technical, so.
That's fine.
But it's engineering at that point. So you have to kind of like build your curves, and then from those curves where they intersect, I think that's where you measure the 15 feet. So, and it has something to do with, again, that curve.
Right.
And the sharper the curve, the less visibility, I guess, so, or the other way around. Daniel would be able to help you, but he usually reviews for the clear sight triangle in the technical review.
It wouldn't affect, any fence I would want to put in my yard would not be affected by that. They'd have plenty of room to see down the street from the corner, so. I can't imagine it being an issue, but not that it's a big deal. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to rattle
Sure.
on, but I did.
Well, actually, a couple of questions have been answered, but one of the questions I had, because I don't have a corner lot, but I live next to someone
Who
that
has
I
a corner
watched
lot?
build their house who was on a corner lot. And they needed to put up the 6-foot fence because they were putting a pool on that side of the house. The way the property is, there's really not room in the back for that sort of thing. Is that kind of where this comes from, having to build the 6-foot rather than the 3-foot fence because of doing the pool
Correct.
situations?
Not the pool situation, but the original zoning, so the history behind all of these administrative variances for the corner lots is, you're correct. So why a variance for a corner lot? Because the only situation where a person would have a 6-foot fence in Oldsmar is when his property or their property is directly adjacent to the property with a corner lot. So as demonstrated on this graphic, the graphic is not there. So, as you see, the primary front on the house adjacent to the corner lot will end up with a 6-foot fence in their front yard. And that's consistent for any corner lot. So if you take any corner lots, if they have a front yard facing this way, well, in certain situations, you will have back-to-back backyards. So the adjacent house will also have a secondary front. But in certain situations, you will have a neighbor who has their driveway that will be adjacent to that 6-foot fence. And this was the original, I believe, the zoning issue, why they have to be reviewed at a variance level.
Yeah,
But again, since 2018, if somebody wanted to put a 6-foot fence in their secondary yard, the adjacent neighbor never, since, I guess, Kathy, you also went through this variance, I think, a long time ago. So historically, neighbors never came out and said, I don't want a 6-foot fence in my front yard. So it's like they put a 6-foot fence, they're like, oh, great. So,
I guess I'm having a hard time. I'm very visual to it. I'm looking at this and I'm trying to, when you're saying a 6-foot fence in your neighbor's front yard, I'm having a hard time visualizing because
by
no
my
one's
house
pointing at the picture. So because, I know a lot of people whose properties have been affected by new construction and new things happening. I don't want to be going on record as being for something if I'm not quite sure how that's going to impact a neighbor in terms of letting anybody who wanted to pretty much do this, even though there haven't been complaints. I'm trying to see it, like this picture are these two different houses? So,
yes,
because I have
so
primary
one
front,
house is
primary
on the
front,
corner lot
secondary
and the
front.
next house is adjacent to it.
And I'm not
So-
seeing a fence in someone's front yard. I'm not seeing that part of what you were talking about.
So if you look at the house, which is adjacent, not the corner lot, but the adjacent house, and if
Okay.
you look at that arrow that shows limit of 6 foot,
I see it, okay,
yeah,
I see.
it points to that.
You're
So
you're talking about on the side, not in their front, okay, gotcha. That
Right,
would be
right,
their
it will
property,
not-
Okay,
it's considered front because it extends beyond the facade of the primary residence.
okay,
yes.
but they could build a 3-foot fence though,
Today, they can build a 3-foot fence
wherever they would like to build that.
as long as
right?
it's their property, no easements, and as long as, yes.
But it wouldn't have to follow the 15-foot setback or any of that as long as it's 3 feet. It's only if it's 6 feet.
Only if the height is 6 foot, yes. And to the pool question that you had, so pools or any kind of other accessory structures in the front yard. And for the zoning definitions here, your secondary yard, or it's your side yard, you call it, it's still considered a front yard. So, and the code states that no accessory structures are allowed in the front yard. Therefore, pool is considered an accessory structure. Therefore, pools have to go through a regular variance approval. So, and most of the time, people, when they put a pool, they want a cage and they want the fence. So that's where the case, and they usually bring all those 3 items together. So if it's part of the garages or sheds, if they're placed in the secondary yard on the corner, they will still have to go through a board of adjustment. So that admin variance today for the residential corner lot was only applicable to the fences. So any of the accessory structures in the secondary yard or your side yard of the corner lot still have to go through the board.
Okay, and then just to clarify, if it's a 3-foot fence, it doesn't have to have the 5-foot setback from the sidewalk as long as it's their property line.
So for 3.5, I don't think we touch the 3.5, because usually the 3.5 feet, that would be just extending beyond the facade. The 3.5 feet usually people put in their front yard along their driveway, so that's where it goes. So it doesn't really create a wall as you walk on the sidewall. It doesn't create a wall right next to you out of the.
I just want to be sure that so none of the rules already apply to the 3.5-foot. All of these would just be related to a 6-foot fence.
We have the text amendment. Let me see how it reads. That's a good question, actually.
I finally asked a good question.
You always ask
Well,
me
while
a
you're
question.
looking for that, I did finally get my fence. My fence went up the end of March, and I finally got my fence replaced. So prices shot up with, materials, so I put it on hold, but finally, some good news.
Well, I know it's much easier today because we moved in our house in 1980, and in 1982, we wanted to put a pool in. And we wanted a 2.5-foot variance in the back because it was just too small. There wasn't enough room to put a decent sized pool in there, so we wanted a 2.5-foot variance. We got it after 9 months. 9 months it took to get it, but that was in 1982, so.
There wasn't any city red tape, it just was the price. I was waiting for the price to come back down, and I did apply for one of those beautification grants. And I got the last of the paperwork in, so I think that's a wonderful thing that they do for the citizens here to, try to offset some of the cost of that. I sure appreciated it.
So I don't think it affected the 3.5-foot fences. We could revisit that. So I know there's one permit that we've approved.
Curious if it's the same.
It
because
is
if
not
we
very
have-
common.
If you had a row of fences and some are 3.5 and some are 6, and you're gonna end up with this kind of, I don't know, just,
Well, my next door neighbor on the other side, long time ago, they had a 6-foot fence up to the front of the house, but they said some new neighbors moved in who had young boys who liked to play football, and so they got upset because the young boys playing football was coming over into their yard. So they put up a 3.5-foot fence in the front part of the yard to keep them out. But I don't think I've ever seen anybody put one across the front. Yeah, I mean, I've seen lots of people put them up on the side yards, to keep, give it buried, but I don't think I've ever seen anybody before.
You ever see those like wooden rail fences in somebody's front yard?
Yeah, I've seen that.
When, I'm sorry, when I
About
say that,
6
I'm
foot, I
talking about
think.
a privacy fence, I'm sorry. Like a solid fence. I didn't mean decorative, yeah.
pound kind of.
I'm sorry, it actually does include, so no fences shall be erected within 5 feet of the back of the
Okay.
public sidewalk. So
Okay,
it's consistent for all of them, yeah.
great.
I was just gonna share something about the 5 feet. So my understanding, because I've seen this in other communities, is that, or other cities too, is that it helps, if there's ever a repair to the sidewalk, it gives room to make that repair.
Yes, that was one of the considerations too. Thank you.
I do have one question for you. If you
I'm all
have
done,
further-
yes,
okay.
thank you.
So when you talked about the easement access,
Mm-hmm.
you said it has to be accessible via a gate?
Correct. So today, if you submit an application, and it depends what type of easement, we have utility easements and we have drainage easements. Current code states that if you have a drainage easement, then no fences shall be in the drainage easements. If you have utility easement, then we have an option to provide gate. So if you have, for instance, a corner lot and you have a utility easement that runs in the back of your property, so you'll have to provide a gate if it's a utility easement right at that corner to have access, to provide access to the utility companies.
Does that count even if the utility easement runs the whole length of the fence? That it only has to be, the homeowner only has to have one fence entrance?
Sometimes there are 2 entrances that will be required. I don't think I have a good visual here. but most of the time it's just one. So for instance, if there was a utility easement running parallel to this gray area here, and you wanted to extend your sidewalk, your fence all the way to 5 feet from that sidewalk, but say you had another 10-foot utility easement, or 15-foot in this case, from the back of the sidewalk, we would request to install gates at both sides where the arrows are indicating, like limits. Like in those locations, you would be required to install gates. Or it's on your discretion, you can move it outside of the easement altogether, then utility easements can repair anything they need.
And they'd
within
have
the
access
easement.
to the easement, okay.
And sometimes they're underground utilities, so we try not to permit anything that runs kind of like in the center of that utility easement, because then you have a chance of maybe destroying your underground utilities.
Okay. Any further questions?
I was just gonna, may I motion?
Go ahead.
I-
Oh, no, hold on for the motion though.
Okay.
Actually, with it, I need to open up the public hearing portion, and I will open it, and I will close it. So, there we go with that piece. What I'll go ahead and do is, I will go ahead and ask for a motion in regards to that.
Okay, I'll motion that the City of Oldsmar amendment to provide definitions for secondary fronts for corner lot properties and to include provisions for 6-foot fences with defined secondary fronts for corner lots, move forward for approval.
Has a motion and a second?
Second.
Kathy, can you do the roll call for the voting, please?
Board Member Cambanis,
Approve, 4.
Board Member Harvey,
Yeah.
Board Member Buckman,
Yes.
Yes.
Board Member Mason,
Yes.
Board Member Oliver,
Yes.
Chair Roundhouse.
Yes.
Okay, Code Amendment 2201 is approved with 6 votes for and 0 against.
Okay. The next agenda item is the selection of the chair for 2022. Do I have any volunteers for the chair?
I have a question first. Who is not supposed, who does not have a reason for not being here tonight? Did everybody say they were gonna be here?
Dale has an excused absence. He had to attend a ceremony for his new son-in-law. He's being sworn in as an officer or graduating officer training. So he was excused, and Pat is not feeling well, so she is excused as well.
Oh, cool, okay.
Yeah.
So would you mind being chair?
Get
Huh?
out. Isn't there a time that you need to serve
No.
on the board before you?
No,
It's just if you're comfortable or not.
you good with being the chair?
If I get a little coaching on some of the parliamentary
Oh, you have
procedures.
plenty of that. So I'd like to recommend her for the chair.
Okay.
Susan for the chair.
Any other?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the conversation. I was.
Just recommending for the chair.
I recommended Susan for the
Yeah,
chair.
Susan got recommended.
Who?
Susan?
Susan?
Susan Oliver?
I'll be okay.
Bob.
No problem. I have no problem with that.
Do we want to do a vote roll for that?
We don't have to do
We don't
that.
have to, okay. So all in favor with Susan?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Well,
And-
thank you.
Vice Chair, John, would you be interested in being vice chair?
I wasn't considering it, but I could.
Okay.
So can you kind of refresh us on the duties? The vice chair would fill in when the chair cannot?
You gotta shine all our shoes and bring us all lunches and
That
every
part I
time.
knew, you already told me that part.
With me, right? Okay. Kathy,
So-
Kathy will hook us up with the
Okay.
info.
But that was a good thing right here.
For the selection of the vice chair, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, second?
Seconded.
All in favor? Aye. Adjourn.